he's become a silly cartoon, animalistic being in comparison to the ultimate girl boss that is Rachel Cooper.
I love the way you put that.
Cinematic fantastic.
Batu, Barada, Nikto.
I'll show you who I am and what I am.
By a werewolf and lives, becomes a werewolf himself.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to the Cinematic Fantastic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Weatherford.
And your other host, William Weatherford.
Get ready for opinions, dad jokes,
and bad jokes
as we watch and review sci-fi and fantasy films from the classics of yesteryear to the new favorites of today.
What amazing day it is, or night, probably. It is a night for hunting as we hunt tonight for the final episode of Cinematic Classics month, and also should be for the year. I want to make note of some appreciation for my dad doing some editing while we were, living life and Christmas and stuff. Which,
Thanks.
By the way, Merry Christmas, and if we need to, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
But he did a lot of work, and he tried his best. It's been a while since Dad has gotten back to editing, so we'll give him his dues, and some credit for helping along with getting these done.
I gave it the old college try, I tried. So if it turned out okay...
Speaking of college, I don't know. I don't have anything to say about college, okay?
Well, I work for university, and I'm going to be starting back, coming back to work probably in a week or so.
And so is most other people.
Too.
But as I was saying, today we are talking about the Charles Laughton exclusive directed film, Night of the Hunter.
Wait, why is it exclusive, William?
It's exclusive because it's the only film that Charles Laughton ever directed. And we've talked about him before in The Island Dr. Moreau's probably one.
Island of Lost Souls.
Island of Lost Souls was the actual name, but it does vary, yeah.
It is the Dr. Moreau tale, so that works.
So, Dad, what did you think of this experience?
Well, this movie, I think it was kind of a little bit different for its time. It was also a throwback in some ways to a different style of storytelling. I thought more even like almost like this in the silent films that we've already gone into, like, to name some of them, Dargolum, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu.
And one thing definitely aiding to that is that it has a much more simple story compared to our other ones. It's very, very secluded in only one location, a very straightforward plot. But, it's his first film, but that doesn't stop this from being a really, really great one.
I think it's underrated, seriously.
It is a cult classic.
It is a cult classic, but that developed over time. As we'll go into, we talk about the reception of this film, how it was received at the time it came out. It's simultaneously a treasure of sorts, and when you discover it, you're like, this is really good. I think of it like a diamond in the rough, and when I say that, I mean the rough of the 1950s and kind of some of those movies that were out during that time,
and the rough of literally a guy's only directed feature being put out into the world. He never did it again.
Yeah, it's a tragedy from his standpoint because of how it was received at the time, and also how the director took it badly.
But concerning it being more like a silent film can also be aided by we've been covering 2-hour movies for like a lot of the things. M was like an hour 49.
Yeah.
We got some 2-hour sort of things. And Night of the Hunter is only an hour 30, so 30 minutes shorter than the rest of them.
Well, let's put it this way. A lot of movies...
More like more like 1930s.
Right. Well, a lot of movies went 90 minutes.
And I mean, stuff like Citizen Kane had like a long, very complex sort of plot. This one is, as we said, much more straightforward, so it would definitely aid to being shorter.
Let's talk about film length real quick. Okay, so I would tell you that 90 minutes is on average, for let's say a comedy or action movie is kind of good because it's unrelenting in its pace. It just goes pow, 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 pow. There are movies that we'll run into that are like 80 minutes long, sometimes 70, 80. They have to get up for a certain amount of minutes actually to qualify to be shown in certain theaters. This is kind of a funny side story, real quick. There's some movies that people even put out nowadays that seem that have a lot of padding in it. Like they'll have scenes where it'll show the entire trip of going from one place to another in a car, and it's kind of, you're like, okay, get to the point. And you kind of realize, oh, wait a minute, this is padding it so that they can put it into certain streaming platforms, or they can show it in certain theaters. And the credits are super long, like they're animated or something that goes super long. So they're padding it and stretching it out.
It's like Studio Ghibli style opening, you're saying?
No, well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of these movies that have a lot of this padding and stretching are generally done by people who haven't done very many movies. So they're kind of doing the best they can. I would not profane the name of Studio Ghibli by saying that that's what they're doing. They only wish they could do something that good.
So that was movie length. Let's talk more about what makes this film sort of confusing when you come upon it, because what is at the forefront of this film is this juxtaposition of, like, this murderer preacher. He's
dark
like,
story. Yeah, it's a dark story.
A dark
man.
story, very religious undertones. The religion comes in a lot as a thematic material, and but another thing is that there's this dreamlike quality of how it's presented, and there's like sort of like a fairy tale. It has been described as a fairy tale, sort of like a nightmare is how it's described by a child's nightmare.
The word fairy tale is used a lot by Charles Laughton when he described this to the actors coming into this.
Yeah, he was like, it's sort of a fairy story, really a nightmarish sort of a Mother Goose tale.
Yeah, and he actually used to, Lillian Gish, he gave her the nickname of Mother Goose.
And as I'll discuss in the plot, there's definitely a lot of things that could tell you sort of Mother Goose qualities as we go along. But another thing is that this juxtaposition also, there's sort of duality, which is another great theme of this, is the duality of love and hate, which is presented by our villain preacher, who is played by Robert Mitchum. And honestly, I would name that character Robert Mitchum. It's the perfect name for him. But his name is Harry Powell, sadly.
Harry Powell, yeah. Harry
but
Powell.
He has love on one hand and hate on the other knuckle. So he has two different knuckles, love and hate. They go at to war each other. And there's a lot of duality that comes present in this film.
Yeah, and it's interesting that really and truly at the heart of this, love is the win. It's the win of this film. And even though there's the darkness of hate, that love can, it looks like, hate's gonna win, right? But love can triumph in the end. And that's ultimately, the light triumphs. And
but these values can sort of be a little bit, conflicting, sort of with the vision of the author Davis Grubb, who's sort of like, he's making his Night of the Hunter to comment on, the religious fakery that lives in this world, which is sort of there in this.
Yeah.
But again, Lawton went, oh, I'm gonna turn this into like a child's nightmare, sort of fairy story, this magical tale with an evil monster man coming after the good children who always escape.
There is a commentary about religion and about what it can be. Like at its best, it's portrayed through Rachel and how she is. She's non-judgmental, whereas you would think that she would punish extremely harshly. It's tempered with a kindness and a forgiveness, and and let's not go that way again. But the punishment angle,
that is Harry Powell,
is very vindictive. It's selfish.
His punishment is a form of hate, while her punishment is a form of love, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. And I noticed that, I think, the second go round.
Another thing about this film is it is very rustic. If you like some rustic stuff where you're living down in is it like the Ohio River or something?
I think it's supposed to take place in, I was mistaken. It was a different Moundsville. It was West Virginia, the Appalachia.
That makes sense. The good old Appalachian, and it's fairly rustic, and sort of, you could compare it to like Tom Sawyer's sort of escapade where it's like a young man, but that's all really where the comparisons lie, because Tom Sawyer is a lot more of a story about some other bigger things and bigger events. Well, this is a more focused story based on just these little two kids and a big villain.
Well, if you think about it, it reminded me of Huckleberry Finn there's like, the characters like Pap and Injun Joe were these older adults who were threatening children. So that I guess that's where the comparisons end. But
Yeah, there's not too much comparison for that.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. I agree. So, Dad, how did this story become brought about?
All right. So, I've heard it often said that it's an American film noir thriller. I would accept that as true. And who else would you get to be in a film noir but somebody who had a lot of experience with it, with Robert Mitchum? Let's just say
Although,
that.
especially with the rustic setting, it could be like, oh, this doesn't seem like a film noir, because I've seen film noirs. I've seen Maltese Falcon. It's not really too much at all like this. But film noir seems to be more of a stylistic choice.
It can be, yeah. It's stylistic.
Although the dreamlike quality is very much exclusive to this one.
It's a fairy tale dreamlike thing that's mixed in with the film noir.
But the lighting is very sort of film noir-y as well.
I think film noir owes a lot to the German expressionism and the expressionism of early directors that we've already gone into at length, but we'll touch on. So it was the movie came out in 1955. It was directed by Charles Laughton. It was his only film that he directed, sadly. It stars Robert Mitchum, Shelley Winters, and Lillian Gish. Those are the main names to associate with the movie. The screenplay was by a man named James Agee, and it was based on, like you said, the 1953 novel Night of the Hunter by Davis Grubb. The plot focuses on
See the bonus teaser for a summary of this picture.
Robert Mitchum's role, and I didn't know this until I looked up. He was inspired by the real-life character of Harry Powers, known nationally as the Bluebeard of Quiet Dell, and West Virginia's most famous mass murderer, who was hanged on March 18th, 1932 at the West Virginia Penitentiary.
Especially as you said, he's called Bluebeard. Harry Powell's called Bluebeard toward the end.
Bluebeard!
That's true. Bluebeard, I have not read the story, but I heard that it's a fairy tale about, or a kind of a mythical kind of story about a wife murderer. He murders his own wives or something. So you get the word Bluebeard when it comes to that kind of killer. That definitely tracks. The film's lyrical and expressionistic style, right? Borrowed techniques from silent film. And that was a very different from movies of the 1940s and 1950s.
And as we said, the silent film sort of inspiration, German expressionism, Fritz Lang, F.W. Murnau.
The shadows, the silhouettes, the smokiness, the lighting, the fact that it was all done mostly on sets rather than on site in West Virginia. He said that he could really sculpt how the scene looked. And if you think about it, there's that expressionistic part of it by crafting the backgrounds, like especially when you see the scene of Harry Powell, when he's first seen by the children. It's a very creepy scene. It's in front of this white picket fence, and here's this dark preacher, all clad all in black, next to a lamppost, and he's in shadow, and behind him, this jagged mountainous hillside or whatever. It's all all part of the set.
But something I sort of want to dispel with the movie is that due to its being about children and having a dreamy sort of quality, you might think that this is supposed to be a children's movie. However, I feel like you could sort of show it to them, but I mean, from people who have, it's been sort of a way too scary experience for younger children. But
yes,
you can think that it's sort of like a children's film mixed in with an adult, as he said, a child's nightmare.
Right, and honestly,
Saw for kids,
Saw for children. No,
you want to play a game?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing with this movie is this character of Harry Powell is a serial killer. He is he's not as indestructible as most slasher villains, but this is a slasher villain for a child's vision of a movie. I don't know how to put it.
So people sort of have a lot of problems with that. I mean, parents looking after their children can be a little bit of an issue a lot of the times.
Yeah. So back.
Yeah. Back to this. The poster, I recall, seemed to have, it was Robert Mitchum and Shelley Winters, which was the Willa, was the mother of John and Pearl, our protagonists.
Yes.
And the poster is all like them both together. He's threatening her. The wedding night, the anticipation, the kiss, the knife, but above all, the suspense.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So even from the beginning, he's threatening violence.
So it's very influential. I would say a lot of directors, modern directors,
A lot of modern directors can take inspiration from this one, along with, like, I don't know, Stagecoach and Citizen Kane, because obviously that was inspired by Stagecoach, as we talked about.
well, and it's not that it was inspiration. I think he was going, this is how movies are made. And the cinematographer had kind of Stanley was his name Tolan? Not Stanley.
Yes, Greg Tolan.
Greg Tolan. Yeah, he basically went, actually, that's one way of making movies, but let me show you the way, and it kind of opened up a big field for him, I think. But the inspiration for this movie for Charles Laughton would have been the silent features of D.W. Griffith. Of course, a very controversial director. He made one of his first films that he made was A Birth of a Nation, which is considered very racist in its imagery. We've come quite a ways from that, but the image on a cinematographical, if that's even a way I can put it, from a cinema standpoint, A Birth of a Nation, Intolerance, the imagery and the way that you frame things in the camera is skilled. It is very skilled, and a lot of those techniques would be used by Charles Laughton in this. Now, the content of some of those movies, is to be looked at kind of with a different eye.
We're talking about another Hunter film, which is a definite great one to watch. So how did Laughton affect the script writing of this movie, Father?
Okay, so I would say it started out as a book by Davis Grubb, who had a lot to do with the making of this movie too. He had a lot of interesting.
He was probably like, "Oh, you want to make a film out of this? Great! I'm gonna show you all the things and be like, oh, cool." And
He was also an artist, so he drew some pictures which actually helped the art director and cinematographer kind of frame some of the shots, and they were like, "Oh, we like this." So because Charles Laughton was very, very collaborative. I mean, he was a team player all the way. He wasn't like it's my way or the highway. He was very like, he was an artist. He was very collaborative. And I think he reflected a lot of the later auteurs that would come out, some of the best modern filmmakers that have some of the best working conditions that you've ever seen. Very fruitful for art, from not only from the actors, but the special effects and the editors, everybody working together to make the best art that they can. It's very hard to, when you have just this one guy who's a dictator over the whole thing.
And another thing, because this guy was new, he often was like, "Okay, I did the shot. What do I do next?" So he's sort of like stuck for opinions, and he had to probably draw from crowd draw meetings and stuff.
Yeah, he did a little bit, and also as we'll go into
he was
later,
new. This was his first thing. He was experimenting with how to do this.
It's not just that he's new. Well, that sounds like Orson Welles, doesn't it? But it's not just that he's new. It's that with Orson Welles had no doubts. He was like, this is going to be great. Yep, let's do that.
But Charles Laughton did probably have some doubts.
He did, and that's one of the tragic things about this is.
And when it didn't do well, he was just like, "Oh, well, I'm not doing this anymore." Oh,
he was mortified. It broke his heart. It broke his heart. It's a tragedy.
Honestly, it's sad, and if honestly he was still alive today, I would have loved for him
Give
to
him a
see,
hug.
give him a hug and rewrite history and give him some hope.
I would love to, you almost want to have like a sit down where, see, okay, he died, unfortunately, before this movie really was, really respected the way it should be.
And there are a lot of people who were like that, where it's like, oh, their stuff wasn't respected until they died, and then afterwards, now they're good. That's sort of heartbreaking. Like, to think from their shoes, like get into their shoes and go, they didn't know that this would become great. They thought they were just a down in the dumps person, terrible director or something, beating themselves up. And probably not exactly that, but I'm probably exaggerating, but you get my point. It was just
I do.
Just imagine in your shoes, just sad that work didn't come out and they didn't have any hope that it would ever be good. Or maybe they just went like, "Oh, well, that was an experiment."
He was doubting himself, but people around him went, no, it's really good, and they would help encourage him. But what was discouraging was after it came out, which we'll go into the reviews and the response from it.
There's a lot of talk indeed about it being sort of an experiment.
Yeah.
Faust is an experimental cinema that truly experiments in a cinema of discovery that in fact discovers. So he's discovering himself.
His name is Francois Truffaut. I think, don't quote me on this, I'm just reaching into my own brain on this. I think Francois Truffaut, he was a French director of what's called the New Wave, which you want to talk about experimentation, they experimented with breaking the fourth wall and all these different things about their movies. And Francois Truffaut, I think he doesn't star as himself, but he is actually in a movie we're going to do after a while. It's called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I remember he actually was in that. I think because Steven Spielberg wanted him to be in that. Because he respects his work a lot, and vice versa.
Yeah, but we have covered a lot about Laughton as well in our Island Lost Souls episode.
Yes.
So there isn't too much else to say about him on his perspective. So as I was saying, the script, right? We were talking about how we affected the script.
Okay, so the book first off was seen by Paul Gregory, who is the agent or producing teammate of Charles Laughton. Okay, so he sent the book to Laughton, and he loved it. He said, "Nightmarish Mother Goose story" is actually what he said. Laughton and Grubb got together. They got along really well. Laughton went to Philadelphia, where he lived. They spent 5 days straight discussing ideas for the movie. He did the sketches, and a lot of those drawings were actually used in the film's storyboard. He wanted to write the screenplay himself, but the studio wanted to hire...
went to a guy named
James Agee.
James Agee.
Agee. And he was hired as the screenwriter because he was from the South. He had experience writing about the Great Depression, which this story takes place during that time. This is funny because he started writing in April 1954, finished in June, but his script was 293 pages. It was much too long for a feature film. So Laughton had to make significant rewrites to the script. Does this sound like anybody familiar? Is he starting to get the Orson Welles, Mankiewicz kind of vibes here?
Yeah, especially with this, scriptwriter who's like, "Oh, I'm going to write this stuff." And the other guy who's like, "I'm going to write this stuff and make some edits where we're due to make this into my vision."
But he insisted that AG be credited as the only writer because, again, Charles Laughton is like, no, I don't want the credit for that.
Because who knows? He saw that probably is what directors did. Was like to tweak things for their vision.
But also he's a very collaborative guy, and he's very there was some as an artist he's a very humble guy, and I think
he's like, "Hey everybody, group vote. I don't know what to do right now. What do you
right
think
what do you think? Right. So there's certain elements of the original script, like the shot of the children's faces floating among the stars with Rachel's face floating in the middle. That was toward the end, and it got moved toward the beginning.
Yeah, which makes sense because it's like, oh, those are characters we haven't seen yet. Well, what do you mean? Who are those characters? That would make a lot more sense toward the end. But the ending for this movie is perfect, and I would not remove it.
I also like the beginning too, because you're like, what is this? And you're drawn in. You're like, what's going on here?
And we'll talk about the opening later.
Yeah, when you do the plot. So Paul Gregory, like I said, he's the agent and teammate of Laughton. He had to work a lot with the production code. I don't know if that's the same thing as the Hays.
Actually it is.
There was a lot of guidelines because I think they had more guidelines even going further in, past the 30s. They had even more guidelines. So they didn't want to see a preacher on screen as an evil person because they thought that would be denigrating religion. So they made an effort to make him not look like an official reverend.
It is a more rustic sort of style. I do agree. He does have that KFC bow, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, that is actually how the preachers looked back then.
Yeah, and especially how Robert Mitchum did. Robert Mitchum's acting is honestly
fantastic.
The crown jewel of this movie.
It's very memorable.
He does it so well. He does the psychotic sort of preacher sort of idea. He believes in his goodness. He believes in how good his religion is, and he wants that money a lot, and he doesn't care about love too much as well. We'll get into a lot of that in the plot, but just so you know, his acting is amazing.
Yes. So now Paul Gregory, he was an optimist. I think he believed that with good art comes good business, and he took a lot of creative risks. He actually became Laughton's manager after he saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show. He was reading a chapter from the Bible book of Daniel, and I actually have a clip of that here.
Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men, loose, walking in the midst of the fire.
So Paul actually got Charles Laughton. He was like, let's do a one-man show where you read sections from classic literature to an audience. And he had a definite talent for the arrangement and everything in that. So that's where the relationship with Paul Gregory came into play. Now, the book, it does have some of the influence of Mark Twain. Also, a storybook writer, Howard Pyle, who wrote the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. See us in season 2 if you want some Robin Hood.
Rachel Cooper.
She shows, I think, faith as it can be, as a goodness. And she doesn't wear any kind of outfit that shows that she's a preacher. She wears a very plain outfit. But the preacher, the one who pretends or wears the pretense of religious authority, he's actually the most evil character in the movie. So that's
I read here that apparently Laughton's initial thought after reading the novel was to cast himself in the role of preacher, and I'm like, ooh, no. I mean, Robert Mitchum's acting is very great in that role, definitely. I would love to see how his acting would have affected this film. From being the director, but I mean there are a lot of stories of the director is the protagonist / antagonist.
Well, he was convinced by Paul Gregory and by others that that he could actually direct this. I mean, because a lot of the ideas he had, you were like, you could be really good, and you're an actor too, and you understand the craft. I mean, he taught acting. In fact, as we'll mention later, Shelley Winters, who plays Willa in the story, she actually studied under Charles Laughton. So she definitely is like, this is, yeah, absolutely. She has nothing but great things to say about Charles Laughton.
Charles Laughton was a very smart man. He knew the métier, is that what you call it, that the actor was the most secure in. And he knew I was from the actor's studio, and he directed me like the Stanislavski would have directed me, with inner meanings and what I wanted and what the character wanted and what the character was trying to do. I had an image of her like a fly fascinated by a spider, and she very willingly walks into this web, and Laughton was very pleased with that, and he said, let's try to get that in the performance. Charles had such great respect as an actor, and this was his first directorial thing, and we all wanted to help him, and he was wonderful. He would make everybody feel they were included.
Let's talk about Robert Mitchum for a little bit.
Okay. Now, Robert Mitchum I would say he was very famous for playing, film noir roles, which he did a lot in the 40s. One of the first roles that he played was actually a movie called, I think it was called The Story of G.I. Joe or something like that. Yeah, The Story of G.I. Joe. He won an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Of course, as many actors will say, it's an honor just to be nominated. And I would agree it is.
Are we covering this one? Or
no.
Is this just, the hippity the casual realistic version of G.I. Joe where they do not come out of the helicopter with parachutes? That would be sad. You see a G.I. Joe movie and you don't see that parachute and you're like, no.
Well, I will
say my precious
my precious movie.
I haven't even watched that, and I can already feel pain that would cause.
But the thing, G.I. Joe was actually a term. Is what they called the quintessential embodiment of an American soldier over there in World War II, and G.I. Joe actually was the name of a doll called that G.I. Joe. Then it evolved down into the actual toys and cartoon series, which we will one day do the animated feature film for G.I. Joe, as well as probably the live action one, which some people
but it's not the 45 one.
No. So
I heard some great things about another film that he was in much later in his life. I think maybe almost to the dead point, which is funny. Dead Man, which is a Western film, 1955. I've heard some good things about that film, so I wonder how well he did.
I'm not sure. I know that I have seen a movie called The Friends of Eddie Coyle, which was in 1973. This movie reminds me of like the crime movies of the Robert De Niro, Scorsese movies. They're more gritty, a little bit darker, and that was
So neither the Hunter if it went sicko mode.
right. No, another character that's very similar to is not his Night of the Hunter character is Max Cady. He plays him in a movie called Cape Fear, and strangely enough, Robert Mitchum played a police detective in the remake of Cape Fear that was done years later. I think Martin Scorsese actually directed that one. And they were like, we got to get, he's a big fan of Robert Mitchum from Night of the Hunter and Cape Fear. He said, we got to get him. I know he played Max Cady, but we're going to have Robert De Niro play Max Cady, and then we're going to have him play a police detective in a side scene. And they were like, yeah, definitely. That's like a cameo kind of role. And that's really cool. Now, the thing is, he had a reputation. He was the kind of guy that like didn't care what anybody thought about him. Sometimes he would sometimes say things that would rile people up, even though he didn't really fully believe those things sometimes.
So he's like, let me tell you the story of right hand and left hand. He's like,
No.
not
No.
that one again.
No, he didn't do that one. But no,
And then they arrest him.
He got arrested for he was hanging out with this other actress, and he got arrested for smoking pot. But I think that it was a sting operation because they were trying to take down actors or whatever, and maybe they had a joint. Who knows? But nowadays, it's kind of like, unless you deal with something where you get, you're bringing pot into Russia, which that happened recently. But the thing is, though, it was much more, pot smoking now with an actor is kind of like, oh, well, whatever. Okay, big deal. They'll go to rehab, But back then it was like, oh, it was like a dark mark on your career. But he survived, obviously. So he was in a movie in 1955, which was probably, I wonder if that was before or after Night. I think it was before Night of the Hunter, called Blood Alley. And he threw the film's transportation manager into the San Francisco Bay.
Oh my goodness.
He showed up on set after a night of drinking, and he tore apart his studio office when they didn't have his car ready for him.
He had a lot of problems in his life.
He did. He was very erratic.
Oh, here's another thing about him that was controversial. Here's another thing that was sort of controversial. Here's his music career, which is not really controversial.
No, it was uncontroversially really good. Okay, we'll go into that.
Apparently, he wrote the song for a movie he was in, Thunder Road, called The Ballad of Thunder
Ballad
Road.
of Thunder Road. He co-wrote it with a guy named Don Ray. Some of those movies after 1955, after March is when Mitchum started a production company called DRM, Dorothy and Robert Mitchum, because his wife is Dorothy Spence. He married her. She was a childhood sweetheart. Man, they were married for like 57 years. Okay, that's uncommon even today, but back then that's pretty cool. And I have to give him that. But anyway, he actually let's talk really quick about his singing. Okay, he had this nice baritone voice, and you even see it in Night of the Hunter.
Yeah, he has that famous voice that's
Leaning on the Everlasting Arms is what is the song that he
Oh
is.
right, the song he sings. So the song he sings, the lyrics are leaning on the everlasting arms. It's like, it makes you think of, safety. You're leaning on God's arms. But the thing is, this is twisted. There is no safety. There is no peace.
There's only, choking you out.
Yeah. What a peace is mine leaning on the everlasting arms is not possible.
But Robert Mitchum singing, he did a movie in, I don't know if it's Jamaica or somewhere in where calypso music, Trinidad, or where calypso music is done. And he was like, he loved it. And so he listened to a lot of the artists over there. He said, I can do that. And he did it, and even did it in the style. He did so well that it charted on the Billboard top music. Now, it wasn't like, it was in the top 100, but it wasn't like top 10. It was like in the 69, 68. But still, he charted. That's pretty good. He did some other things as well, including one of the songs on there was the Ballad of Thunder Road that he did.
Yeah, did he ever do anything else with Lillian Gish, or was this his only time with Lillian Gish?
This was his only time with Lillian Gish. But again, as we'll talk about Lillian Gish in just a second, her last movie that she did was for David Selznick, and did that with him in 1948. So she was kind of like, I don't know if she had a bad experience on that movie, but what happened is she didn't have a good experience on it, and she was like, yeah, I'm kind of done. And it took Charles Laughton to kind of tell her that you represent the purity of this, and also the fact that he was using the inspiration of D.W. Griffith, and Lillian Gish was in like 40. How many movies was it? Was at least like 40 of D.W. Griffith's movies.
She was in A Birth of a Nation and Intolerance, which were some.
Well, Intolerance was about like a historical anti-tyrant kind of movie, but Birth of a Nation was specifically about the beginning of the Ku Klux Klan, and it painted the Ku Klux Klan in a kind of heroic. It's an ugh movie, definitely. But if you watch it, you would have to watch it for, you would have to separate the content from the cinematography and the things that it used that would be copied by so many other directors. And it's very hard to extract how you feel about the content from what this, from the skill of the artist. That's hard to do sometimes. But I will say that Lillian Gish was often called the first lady of film, I would agree with that, because from silent film's inception, she was there. And she used to put herself, have a lot of actors like Tom Cruise who'll do his own stunts. She would, if a character was close to death in the movie, she would starve herself for 3 weeks.
Man.
The director was like, we better finish this film or she's going to die. First lady of American cinema. Yep, that's absolutely true. Her acting career spanned 75 years.
Yeah, she was around for a while. And I mean, especially
Yes.
during 1955, you see her as an older woman. She must have been like white-haired, old Rose.
Oh, okay.
From Titanic.
Let's see. When was the last one? Okay.
I mean, she went till 87, and I think Robert Mitchum went to 97. Man,
I think that Lillian Gish did the Whales of August, which was a little small picture. I'll tell you one thing about Lillian Gish. There was a theater for putting on plays, and it was at a university, or I think somewhere, and it was called the Dorothy, which was her sister, who was also a famous actor too. Dorothy and Lillian Gish Theater, and a bunch of people protested and said no. She was in A Birth of a Nation, one of the most racist movies ever. Her name does not need to be on it, and they took her name off on it. And then it took a bunch of other actors and actresses to come back and go, no, she really does need to have her name on it. And they kind of won.
Yeah, I mean, she's a pretty good person, but I mean, she was young, probably. She was probably very young. Maybe she was a teen in that movie. Maybe she was a background role. We can't ever know. I mean, especially with, how destructed the tapes must be by this point. So I see that apparently Shelley Winters was in Pete's Dragon 1977. Does that mean that's the Disney animated version?
Yes. The only one in my mind. I don't like the remake at all. And the thing is, Shelley Winters, when she first started out, a lot of the roles that she got were of the blonde bombshell type, because she was, kind of had that look.
And she's this young blonde lady.
Yeah, but that's not just it. She was a craftsman of her art. She studied the techniques of Stanislavski and the method acting and all these.
And the way that she portrays her character breaking mentally is very, very good. I mean, there are probably some other great characters that break down mentally that probably wouldn't be in too much comparison to. I mean, Joker, maybe. I don't know. Joker, people who play the Joker got to be really good.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of the people who have played characters like the Joker, specifically, I would say.
Oh, was she in the 1960s Batman TV show?
She was.
As a villain?
Yes, Ma Barker.
That's funny. We're literally talking about it right now, and she's probably face to face with Joker.
Oh, wow. Well, she's probably met the guy who played Joker in the old series. But, of course, what I find funny is she was in a movie with Alfie, with Michael Caine, who played Alfred in the Nolan movies, right? And she was also in the 1960s. So she has met two different sides of Batman. One of the first, widely recognized Batman portrayals, and one of the last ones.
I mean, who knows? You've got to have a blonde lady in a Batman film, so it makes sense. As well as a lot of film noirs and a lot of, other things,
Early on in her career, she was the blonde bombshell thing type. She had to kind of get away from that type because she studied her craft, Shakespeare. She studied under Charles Laughton. She took her craft seriously, right? But at the same time, there was actually a role later on. I think the Poseidon Adventure, she actually gained a lot of weight to play that role, and she never was able to take the weight off again.
Oh, a lot of struggling with movies and weights.
You remember Christian Bale, who played Batman, right? He lost weight, so much weight to play this character in The Machinist, and then he gained all that muscle weight back to play Batman in Batman Begins, and then he lost all that and gained, a gut to be in the movie Vice, where he played a former vice president. It's just a lot of times you do so much damage to your body, if you're trying to portray these roles. And with her, she gained weight there, and that's fine. But it kind of typecast her a little bit in some other thing. But maybe that gave her a chance to really dig in and go against type. She was always cast as the blonde bombshell, but now she can be these other types.
And another thing to talk about losing weight is Les Miserables, the 2012 film. There were some things about Hugh Jackman. He was the role as like this prisoner dude. I don't know.
Jean Valjean, yeah.
He was probably one of the main characters, I guess. He didn't drink for like months, so that's honestly really stupid. Especially Les Miserables has a lot of music. The whole thing is singing, basically. You do not want to sing while being like parched throat for like months.
Exactly.
And especially like Anne Hathaway as well did lose some weight and didn't drink a little bit too.
And her hair and she cut all her hair off, I think, live.
And she cut her all hair off in one take.
Well, she had her, the person who works on hair when you see their hands cut her hair, it's actually their real hands, because she wouldn't trust anybody else cutting it other than that person.
So in short, just don't do this. I mean, they had a lot of shenanigans they did during this behind the scenes. They had, doing a day of takes just to use the first takes. And the orchestra had to adjust to the actors in real time. That is such a big pain. Just don't do that.
It turned out really well in many ways, except for probably the singing.
Except the music got chopped up.
Some of the
weird.
singing from Russell Crowe was not great, but other than that,
I know there were 3 actors that were really good, but in short, just don't do that.
A lot of the work that they do, it shows, and not just in this movie. I'm talking about a lot of movies where people put in the extra work to really embody their parts. So speaking of a really important part of this movie, I would say that a lot of the look of the movie, just like with Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, how you could say Greg Toland had as much to do with Citizen Kane as Orson Welles did. I would agree on that. I would say the same thing about Stanley Cortez, who was the cinematographer. He actually did shoot Magnificent Ambersons for Orson Welles in 1942, but this is a different style than that. It's more theatrical in the way it's staged, and the chiaroscuro lighting. It's unreal lighting. It's that's where the expressionism comes in. But okay, so let's talk about the music real quick.
Walter Schumann was the composer.
He was.
And he did a very good job on getting the style of the music, and there's just a lot of hauntingly beautiful children hymns, sort of chorals, yeah. And they set the mood really, really well of the childlike dreaminess.
Yeah, they worked together before on a movie called a stage production of John Brown's Body, which Laughton was in. The thing that he did is he had him on set when they were doing the filming, and he would have his orchestra play some parts to kind of get the people in the mood. And that was not often done with movies. They would come back behind and do it later, and add it to the film. And this way, the people kind of got the feeling of it at the same time. Yeah, just getting the actors in the feel of it by hearing what the music sounds like, plus also all the voices that were used a lot. Do you remember the part where Harry Powell, or Robert Mitchum, he goes, "Children," and he does the up thing? He was told that by Schumann to do that because it sounded menacing.
It is very menacing. We'll talk about that later.
So Laughton calls Schumann his right-hand man. He had a lot of control over a lot of different stuff, and he said he was great.
Technically, you'd have a lot of right-hand mans, because it's like, you have Davis Grubb, and then Charles Laughton, and then you have cinematographer, and you have Walter Schumann, and it's just, and technically everyone else helping him with his stuff. Very collaborative. He had a lot of right-hand men.
Tell me another movie. Have you ever seen a movie where Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, the hymn, was as menacing as it was in this movie?
I agree.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that when we go into plot. So
You You are not safe and secure from all alarms.
No, you are not safe and secure when it comes to Harry Powell. One thing about how he shot this movie is he would shoot and he would keep running the camera even after cut, because then he could say, try that again but with this inflection, and they would immediately try again.
Great clips of that on YouTube if you want to see.
There are. That's great. I haven't seen that. I'd like to see that. So what that does is it lets them craft it as they go. And of course he's an actor, so he understands the actor's craft. There's a lot of great actors that have taken turns as directors, and you can see it because they kind of understand the process.
So before we go to the break, Dad wanted to put in, as we go into the break, a clip of Guillermo del Toro, who recently did the Pinocchio Netflix adaptation, stop motion, that he had a thing or two to say about Night of the Hunter.
Yeah, and we can leave you with that because, and the reason I'll do that is because if we leave you with what people at the time thought of this movie, weird and intriguing, curious, they didn't say a lot of good things about it. They said, "Oh, it went kind of wrong. It had too much melodrama." I don't agree. I think it wasn't thought of as well at the time it came out, and it was a flop. And Laughton was heartbroken. We already talked about that. But to hear what a lot of directors and actors say now about this movie, it really shows how appreciation for a film can grow over time, and we can kind of see a hidden jewel, a hidden gem here. Like money hidden away to be found in a doll. No, okay.
So we'll play that clip for you and then join you back after that break for the plot of Night of the Hunter.
The Night of the Hunter.
However the trailer says it. I gotta look up the trailer, actually. I wonder how they say it.
So we'll leave you with what Guillermo del Toro has to say about Night of the Hunter, and then we'll go into break, and after that, the plot.
And the movie contains some of the scariest things I've ever seen. It encapsulates the spirit of dread in the persona of Robert Mitchum like no other, but also because it contains some of the most lyrical and poetic images and passages in any genre film. The hair floating in the water, I've been trying to do that for 25 years.
It's a Rousseau painting.
It's like a beautiful painting, and the surreal fact that she's laying there in a very beautiful, peaceful way, but it's a corpse. The wandering of the children through the woods is pure Brothers Grimm.
Yeah.
The distant singing voice of the preacher is the big bad wolf. Charles Laughton is one of my favorite actors. His Hunchback of Notre Dame is the most moving because he understood this fragility and monstrosity at the same time, which are why his only movie, and a perfect first movie, are made of such material. Because he understood beauty and horror at the same time. And he knew what it was to not belong in the world and be lost in the woods like those kids. And he knew what was the dread and how you could find art and beauty and fragility in the middle of the horror of it all. And Laughton came to America, and like another rotund, not very beautiful man, Alfred Hitchcock with Shadow of a Doubt, they both tapped into the shadow side of America. Hitchcock with the white picket fence, Little Town and Shadow of a Doubt, was able to see the lurking shadow around the corner in Uncle Charlie, which was Joseph Cotton. And Laughton was able to look at the Southern Gothic and find in this preacher that sang hymns and find the menace and the horror in those spiritual tunes. And the uncanny, unlikely domino of this Englishman coming to America and being able to reinterpret the reality of a quintessential American writer in a quintessential American setting through the European eyes. The fact that exile, in the case of Hitchcock, in the case of Laughton, in the case of Buñuel in Mexico, sharpens the eye of a filmmaker, has served as consolation to my own biography and career.
Welcome back to again for Cinematic Classics, the last episode where we're covering Night of The Hunter, a movie full of religious corruption, but it's also sort of about children and how they endure, which is sort of what Laughton brought to the table versus what the author Davis Grubb brought to the table with the religious corruption stuff. And a movie that also came out at the cusp of the end of black and white, or not necessarily the end, but like it wasn't really common in the 1950s because it was waning out. 1940s had a lot of black and white, but it was waning. And then 1960s, there would be like basically none.
Do you remember? Well, there's still some black and white to come. Do you remember? We've had discussions, listeners. You remember we've had discussions in the past. William was asking if they could do in color, why did they do in black and white? And I can tell you one quick reason why is that the studio actually said, "Oh, why not do this in color?" And they went, "No." Because what we are trying to do here with the dark and the light and the shadow and the fog,
chiaroscuro lighting, that is most effective only with black and white, because the way it's shaded is just so, it's very,
well, there's shades.
It's very striking shading.
There's also shades of gray too, but there's movies that are made nowadays that are done in black and white, and they are better for it. One movie I mentioned was The Lighthouse, and that came out I think a year ago, whatever.
All hopes for a new black and white movie.
Let's put it this way: they did it black and white on purpose. Is kind of what I was trying to say, but yeah.
So, we begin the movie with a starry sky with a bunch of floating heads of who we figure out is Rachel Cooper, the mother goose of the people, played by Lillian Gish, and 5 other children we don't know who they are, and they're listening to her talking about false prophets, wolves in sheep's clothing.
That's definitely going to come up later.
That does come up later. While there is the song in the background, "Dream, Little One, Dream."
It's lovely.
And I didn't notice this at first, but there is actually a title drop in the lyrics to this, which was "The hunter in the night fills your childish heart with fright, and then fear is only a dream, so little one dream." We get Rachel Cooper saying about how she told all the other stories and stuff, and she says, well, this time she's going to tell about bewailing false prophets in sheep's clothing, but also how a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit.
Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them.
Now, what I get from that is, remember how we were talking about Harry Powell? He has the skin of the preacher, and people, and the way he looks, and they're like, oh, he's a holy man, he's a good man. Oh yeah, and then of course it's what he does that proves that he's evil.
So after this, we get a far view from above this farm-like place that this town that it takes place in. It's shot by helicopters, so it's very shaky. It didn't have stabilization, but they usually
that came much later. Yeah,
but the aerial shot, man. I mean, with stuff like Citizen Kane, they did that with like models, so they are very limited in that sense. And then now we have full airplane shots. Helicopter shots. And then next we're probably gonna get like full drone shots, big crane shots, to where it's like you could just sweep over a bar just like that.
Well, also realize that, with these, bonus episodes, we are jumping quite ahead in time from 1931-32, where we last, left off some of the movies we were talking about in season 1. We jumped 20 years ahead, so there's quite a bit of technical wizardry that's happened since then.
And about we're all like, there's no music in this one, and this one, and this one, and most of the things from season 1, versus this one has like a lot of music in it, so...
Oh yeah, it's an evolution.
So we have children playing hide-and-seek outside of a rural house, but suddenly, one of the children tries to hide in the cellar. There is a body in there of a woman,
Yeah, like a
that's
widow.
Ominous.
The interesting thing is, it's a child's game, a child's innocence, and then now the most dark thing that can happen, discovering a body.
And so once we're getting over the talking about knowing the tree by their fruit, then we get a cut to Harry Powell, the preacher. He's in a stolen car in the countryside. He's one of the false prophets she was talking about.
Indeed.
And this part, there's at this immediate cut, there's a music playing. There's also Mitchum's great acting as he says this monologue that he's about to say, and the context of the shot with, good trees can't bring forth evil fruit, beware false prophets, and the ominous acting. This is the villain from the start. you know this is the villain. You just know.
It is. Also, he's kind of talking to himself, talking to God, talking to himself. So, I think he
so
seriously
he's saying,
believes God wants him to do this stuff.
he says, well, what now is it? Another widow. So from this we learned that he kills widows. He kills so many widows that he disremembers, he says.
Well, now what's it to be, Lord? Another widow? How many's it been? 6? 12? I just remember. You say the word, Lord. I'm on my way. You always send me money to go forth and preach your word. A widow with a little wad of bills hid away in a sugar bowl. Lord, I am tired. Sometimes I wonder if you really understand. Not that you mind the killings. Your book is full of killings. But there are things you do hate, Lord. Perfume-smelling things, lacy things, things with curly hair.
So when he talks about the things that the Lord hates, he says lacy things with curly hair. Funnily enough, Proverbs 6, I believe, says, the things that God detests are hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. Who does that sound like?
It sounds like everything Harry Powell does.
It sounds like Harry Powell. So this is an outright lie we get, if you know scripture enough.
I hate to bring this into kind of a modern context, but he is what we would call a misogynist. He hates women.
He does.
The thing is, he loves women to an extent, but he hates them for making him feel those feelings of lust or whatever.
But he does devise wicked schemes, rush into evil, shed the innocent blood, and pour out lies as a false witness.
That's everything he lives for.
But he says the things that he detests are lacy things with curly hair. Totally not him. And that's interesting. So, from him saying things with curly hair, this is illustrated by a jump cut to him and a lot of bored men watching a dancer. This dancer is not doing hot, it seems, because they're all bored. We get a close-up, zoom into his left hand, tattooed with the letters H-A-T-E on his forefingers.
Well, it's not that they're bored. They just have a look. They have a look of hungriness. They look at her like, I want that, and he's sitting there going, I'm gonna kill you.
Though.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy though.
But yeah, he does get tempted to kill when he reaches into his coat pocket and he has a switchblade knife that he pops open. But then he decides not to kill her. Yeah, he says
there are too many of them. You can't kill a world.
He's an incel.
So suddenly, he gets arrested and sends 30 days in prison for Grand Theft Auto.
GTA Moundsville, West Virginia.
Exactly, GTA Las Virginia. Exactly.
Nice.
So the judge is just absolutely disbelieving. He's like, a man of God, Harry Powell.
Harry Powell.
And after this, we do get another shaky air shot of the rustic landscape. And then we get our protagonists, who are John and his sister Pearl. They're playing together when their father drives up, climbs out of the car, and he's bleeding from a bullet wound in the shoulder, gun in a hand, wad of money in the other, and he has $10,000 in that money. That's $10,000, and there's police sirens in the background. He's like, where can I hide this? I can hide this here, no, and he decides to give it to the children instead and makes them swear to never tell anyone, even their mother.
Again, this is another part of the movie is secrets.
I swear, I'll guard Pearl with my life.
I will guard Pearl with my life.
And I won't never tell about the money.
Yeah, that's a big part of the movie.
Yeah. And then after this, the police finally arrive, and John is like, don't! And this comes back later, in fact. And in fact, they established a lot of things in the beginning. Very impressive, because it's like, oh, we have the villain, we know he's villainous, we have the protagonist, we have the inciting incident, we have everything we need to know, basically. So it's interesting.
Yeah, the players are on the board, on this chessboard. And he's put all the pieces in play.
And since this is a very focused plot, and we have all the pieces already, it's sort of like, I mean, they could have spent more time putting the pieces, but they don't have that many pieces, because as I said, it's a very closed-in sort of story.
Yeah,
it's very simple.
It's maybe 4 or 5 main core characters that are super pivotal in this plot. You know,
it's a singular conflict.
It is.
So the next scene is the Moundsville Penitentiary, where John's dad and Harry Powell are both together in a bunk bed. So John's dad is mumbling in his sleep, and the little children shall lead them.
And the dad is played by Peter Graves of Mission Impossible.
He looks like he'd be in Mission Impossible.
He is. That's why.
So Harry Powell notices this. He's like, oh, this is a biblical thing. So he takes notice and he starts conversation about, who they are and stuff. And the dad reveals that he steals money because he hates the sight of homeless, starving children in the Depression. Harry also shares his views that
I come not with peace, but with a sword.
He's also trying his best to convince him to tell about the money and where it is, so he can build a tabernacle with
that cursed bloodied gold.
But he's not going to build a tabernacle.
No, he's not. So here's the thing about, in a way, you start to realize these are both criminals, right? But which one do you feel for? You feel for Peter Graves' character because he's stealing out of necessity.
Yeah, the simple bare necessities versus killing widows and getting their money, which is literally useless.
He's evil, yeah.
All you're doing is just depriving the world of women.
Which
sounds funny.
It's selfishness. It's utter selfishness, and it's hatred.
So Harper then seeing him with the knife, he doesn't come with peace, but with a sword. He's like, "What strange religion do you profess?" And Powell goes, "The
religion the Almighty and me worked out betwixt us."
Which is sort of sus.
Yeah.
And he also shares his view that
salvation is a last-minute business, boy. If you used to let that money serve the Lord's purpose, he might feel kindly turned toward you. Keep talking, preacher.
At this moment, Harper is his name. This is John Harper and Pearl Harper, John's dad. He's put something in his mouth and then immediately falls asleep as he's talking to him. Which makes me think, did he do a little addendum mortis at this time? I don't know. Or did he just put himself to sleep?
I don't think so. I think he did. They did the hangman after he does mention. He said, "Well, how did Mr. Harper go?" And he said he went easy. Is that what it was?
Something like that. But the religion, the Almighty and me worked out betwixt us is interesting because it's like, oh, he was part of this process, so obviously he's not pure.
He thinks he's high enough where him and God can have a kind of a agreement between them. Okay, sure.
But ain't no valley high enough, ain't no valley low.
Ain't no right.
So after this, we have John's dad gets hanged the next day for his punishment, but Powell goes free, and he's praying to the Lord, giving thanks for the knowledge of a widow to kill. And $10,000 for plays clip.
Lord, you sure knowed what you was doing when you put me in this very cell at this very time. A man with $10,000 hid somewhere, and a widow in the making.
So after that, we get a sort of brief interlude of the executioner for some reason, but the reason is we go to his house, he talks to his wife, and he looks sweetly at his sleeping kids, which is to illustrate, another set of kids, sort of kids in this movie, but it never comes back. It's not too necessary.
It's little imagery.
So the aftermath of John's dad's hanging is there's a group of kids making fun of him and drawing a stick figure being hanged, singing "Hing, hang, hung, see what the hangman done," and it is very, very mean-spirited.
It's creepy too, yeah.
Another thing is we also, John and Pearl were walking by, and John is contemplating buying a watch before a woman comes out, asking about where the money's at, and sort of that subject, and he's avoiding talking about it at all, which is showing how loyal he is to the concept of keeping it secret.
Yeah.
We also see their mother, whose name is Willa, and she's working with Mrs. Icy Spoon, in the Mrs. Icy Spoon's ice cream parlor.
And Willa is played by Shelley Winters. She does an excellent job here.
So she's telling her that she needs to find a husband.
No woman is able to raise growing youngsters alone. The Lord meant that job for two.
I see. I just don't want a husband.
Ain't a question of wanting or not wanting. You're no spring chicken. You're a grown woman with two little young'uns. It's a man you need in the house, Willa Harper.
And interspersed through this conversation is ominous shots of the train with do, 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 which seems to be a sort of motif of Harry Powell, because it plays a lot of times he's on screen.
Also, Robert Mitchum said that when he was younger, he used to ride the rails, which means you basically you hitch a ride on a train. So I think that may be that
he's got out of prison.
Yes.
Like, joke-free.
Exactly.
But John's dad, who didn't do anything as serious as, like, kill millions of women, is the one that gets hanged. So, next after this is John telling Pearl a bedtime story so she can go to sleep about a rich king who had a son and a daughter living in a castle in Africa.
And one day, this king got taken away by some bad men. And before he got took off, he told his son to kill anyone who tried to steal his gold. And before long, the bad men came back and...
Just then arrives the big shadow of the head of the preacher, and it's on the wall, and Pearl gasps and points in fear, because it's like, oh, there's something there.
It is creepy and ominous, man.
So John looks out the window. He just sees the preacher, just looking at them for a little bit and walking by slowly, unassuming, while singing, leaning on the everlasting arms. So the next day, we have John hanging out drinking coffee with his Uncle Bertie, as well as on his raft house. Very great character intro by having the coffee be black coffee for John, but he decides to get Irish coffee. So
yeah, what is Irish coffee?
It's alcohol.
Yeah, it's alcohol in his coffee.
And he also flips down a picture of his wife, who is the aunt, who is dead as well, so he doesn't really like her at first.
Well, I wonder if he's actually uncle, or he might just be a good friend of the family that they just call uncle. That's common in some people.
Uncle Bertie just casually tells John, hey, there's someone at the ice parlor who knows about your dad. And John is like, oh no, well, what's going on here? So he immediately goes to the parlor to see that the preacher is there, speaking to everyone. Everyone is just impressed about him. They're just enamored. Pearl is on his lap, and he's explaining that he was previously employed at the prison, and that his presence is...
It is my joy to bring this small comfort to his
loved ones.
Now, wait a minute. Is he saying that he's almost like a chaplain at the, like a lot of prisons will have like a prison preacher or reverend that can kind of talk to prisoners. So he's not even saying, hey, I served time doing GTA with your husband. He didn't say that. He just said, I was employed at the prison.
And he is he is heavily intruding into their life by providing comfort, phoning a relationship with the father.
Yep.
So Mr. and Mrs. Spoon especially are finding Harry impressive, most other people as well. Mrs. Spoon especially finds him very virtuous and scriptural.
It's a mighty good man would go out of his way to bring a word of cheer to a grieving widow.
And then Harry sees John looking at his hands, and then he tells the famous story of right hand and left hand.
H-A-T-E. It was with this left hand that old brother Cain struck the blow that laid his brother low. L-O-V-E. You see these fingers, dear hearts? These fingers has veins that run straight to the soul of man. The right hand, friends, the hand of love. Now watch and I'll show you the story of life. These fingers, dear hearts, is always a warring and a tugging, one against the other. Now watch 'em. Old brother left hand hates a fighting, and it looks like love's a goner. But wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hot dog loves a winning. Yes, sirree. It's love that won. And old left-hand hate is down for the count.
And everyone is mesmerized, all but John. Mrs. Spoon is enthusiastically inviting Powell to stay for the picnic. Another thing is like, oh, the fudge smells good, and it's like, oh, it's for the picnic, you have to come to the picnic to get my fudge, heh. So he's sort of trapped there. So this is like a third of the way of the movie. We get to the picnic scene, he's singing, bringing in the sheaves, which is a very, rustic song. It's gonna come back again, but it's like, it's a very rustic sort of song about, harvest time.
Oh, he's harvesting some souls, all right.
I guess that's the one connection. He's harvesting souls.
He's gonna. Well, he's
gonna take his scythe and rip out the hearts of all the children.
Well, the harvest as well is he's gonna harvest in the money.
I guess that's where you can see that. So Mrs. Spoon thinks Harry Powell is perfect for Willa because, as we were talking about, she was all like, you need to get a husband back ASAP, and he's like, oh, this is perfect for you, and he sends her to talk with him in private. She also says, interestingly, that you need to clear the mud out of your soul, which is interesting, because she sees him as a source of holiness that will clean anyone who just touches his cape, which is actually something I might talk about later. An interesting comparison.
She married a man who was a, quote, criminal, right? So they're like, that's a sinful thing for a man to be a criminal. And it kind of, it muddied her reputation. And so maybe this is a way for, she can get a man who's a good man. Not like Ben Harper, but a good man. The funny thing is they're the reverse.
It's the exact reverse.
Ben Harper is the good man and Harry Powell's the evil one.
So Willa's very unsure at first, she's like, oh, maybe it's too early, maybe he's only interested in the money, which is, she's completely right about those 2 points, but she accepts anyway. They go talk. So John and Pearl then overhear Harry Powell telling Willa that her husband told her the money's buried in the Ohio River, and she's so relieved about this, because she's like, tell me it's safe somewhere and I don't have to worry about it. It's like, oh, it's at the bottom of the river, but as we know, it's not. Another thing she says after this is she says, I feel clean now. My whole body's just a-quivering with cleanness.
Yikes.
Which is just, she's talking a lot about being purified just through him, which is scary, because it's actually the opposite effect.
Also, bottom of the Ohio River comes back.
We also get a short thing where, Harry Powell's like, hey, John, your tie is crooked. And then I wrote here, no, your tie is crooked, just like your soul.
Right.
Because as we said, he has that KFC tie. Then we get a minor scene with Uncle Bertie. He's playing ukulele. On again, as I was saying, they have a raft boat where Uncle Bertie lives. And he's talking about, the days of yore and Uncle Bertie being a hero and stuff, I think. So John then returns home after dark from this. The house is silent until a black shadow moves behind him. Harry Powell's there, and he steps out of the side room. He's like, good evening, John. In the narrow hallways where he's closed in, John is told that him and John's mom are married tomorrow. That's awful quick, because it's in a matter of days, they're just like, oh, we're marrying
hours. Now. It's like hours, it feels like.
No proposal. His charisma is huge. If he were a D&D character, it would be 17 or something.
It would be really high.
Speech 100.
Yes, exactly.
So, John is just horrified this is like, you ain't my dad. You'll never be my dad.
When we get back, we're all going to be friends and share our fortunes together, John.
You think you can make me tell, but I won't!
And at this, he realizes, too late, that Harry Powell realizes, oh, he knew where the money at.
Uh-oh.
He's like, tell me what, boy? We aren't keeping secrets from each other, are we, little lad? But then he goes, well, it doesn't matter. We've got a long time together, boy. It's very ominous.
He's patient up to a point. There's a point where his patience is going to run out.
But now he knows that the money is known with John. John knows about the money and where it is. So then there's a scene of Willa and Harry Powell simply driving off to their wedding day. The music is very chaotic here. It's sort of like, you can interpret it as being sort of happy, but in a chaotic sense, where it's like wedding music, but you throw a bottle of juice over it or something, and it sounds so chaotic. That's a lot of things about this movie, is that there's a lot of points in the music where it's like, oh, this sounds like it could almost be happy, sort of, but not really. It's got chaotic undertones in it.
Yeah.
The next scene, John's mom heads to bed. Harry Powell's very cold toward her. He's upset about being interrupted praying. He obviously has no romance for her. He acts very abusively in this scene where he's like, go look at yourself in the mirror.
Do as I say.
And he tells her that she's only good for taking care of children.
That body was meant for begetting children.
And that she's not good for romance. Then she allows her in the bed before she prays to be clean like Harry wants me to be.
So I can be what Harry wants me to be.
So there's a obviously abusive relationship, and as we'll see later, there is a clear sign of that, but she is just in a dream almost. Did I skip anything?
The sermon. They're in their...
Oh, next is the sermon. Her, Harry, and a passionate audience. They're in a tent with flaming torches. It's a very cultish atmosphere.
There used to be church tent revivals.
But this is probably for some exaggeration, but if the person speaking to you and healing you was Hitler. Because, the Hitler speeches sort of can echo this sort of style.
Also, the flaming torches are very close, and everything in this scene is very claustrophobic.
Reverend, oh, that's where the Lord stepped in. That's where the Lord stepped in.
Yes.
He said, the Lord, to that man, you take that money and you throw it in the river.
In the river!
cleansing fire.
A cleansing fire, I guess.
Yeah.
Although it's burning away all the good stuff, basically.
Exactly.
So John finds Pearl is cutting up the money that they had, the $10,000, making it all useless. Or not all of it useless,
She's making little dolls with it.
She's making little doll things
She doesn't know
with it.
what it's good for. She's a kid.
So they're just like, oh, you gotta clean up or else we'll see. In this case, Harry Powell is in the background as they are cleaning up and stuffing it into the doll.
How he doesn't see this is like
It's very menacing because he's like, children.
He knows. Oh my gosh.
What are you doing?
How does he not see? It's so stressful.
Willow, the wife and mother, comes in and she's just like, oh, have you been impudent to Harry again? He has sent him to bed, and so she's just sort of scolding him in bed. So he's like, oh, I wasn't trying to be impudent. He was talking to me about the money again. And then she goes,
John, you always make up that lie. There is no money. Why can't you get that through your head?
Thing is, this is false. There is money. She is just entirely convinced there's no money because she has cleansed her soul. In quotes. So next scene, Harry Powell then corners John again, very creepily, and berating him about the location of the money. Just asking him over and over and over again is his tactic. He's wearing him down relentlessly to reveal the hiding spot. Unfortunately, he does take advantage of Pearl liking him and embracing him, and he decides to drop the pretenses and talk to her.
Where's the money hid?
Pearl, you swore you wouldn't tell. You swore. You hit Daddy with a hairbrush.
Now, you see, we just can't have
There's
anything
a
to do
part
with
where he's
John.
like, you know what, I'll try again later. So he tries again later. This time Willa is coming late. It's a dense fog. She's outside. She overhears Powell convincing Pearl to reveal the secret.
Where's the money hid?
And then he gets very, very,
Where's the money
very mad
hid?
at her.
Tell me, you little wretch, or I'll tear your arm off.
Pearl is screaming and running away just for Willow to arrive. But it's not a savior moment. She just ignores his yelling. She smiles instead before leaving, you know? She is totally brainwashed. And that's why we say her acting was very good in this movie. Again, also, Robert Mitchum, man, his acting is very good in this role.
It's chilling.
Yeah, we also get a quick scene of Mr. Spoon is doubting Harry Powell at this point. But Mrs. Spoon is like,
May the Lord have mercy on you, Walt Spoon.
It's interesting the flip that she does. She's right now she's very defensive of him, but she flips hardcore at some point in the movie, and we'll go into that later.
Yeah, and so we get a great scene. Willa's on her back on her bed, her arms are crossed over her chest, praying. Harry is waiting on her to do so, and she speaks as if in a dream. In between this, Harry slaps her, and that's where we get, yes, this is an abusive relationship. I mean, he's waiting for her to finish praying. Earlier, he was like, look at yourself. And then he had to allow her back in bed.
She's got her arms crossed, like you would cross arms for someone who's going to be put into a coffin.
Yeah, she's in a halo of window light. And she's all like,
the children know where it's hid. John knows. Is that it, Harry? That it's still here amongst us. Tainting us. You must have known about it all along, Harry. But that ain't the reason why you married me. I know that much. He made you marry me so you could show me the way in the life and the salvation of my soul. Ain't that so, Harry? So you might say that it was the money that wrung us together. The rest of it don't matter.
And she says the rest of it don't matter at the same time as the music is crescendoing. He raises his love arm with knife in hand, about to strike her before Star Wars wipe, which is hilarious. It's the only one, but it is a Star Wars wipe. Revealing John and Pearl sleeping, John awakes to a car noise driving off. So we get a short scene somewhere of Mr. Spoon drinking peach brandy or something, which is he needed it.
Take a sip, buddy. You're in for a rough situation. So
and the long rough situation is the Spoons are hanging on to every word as Powell is lamenting that she turned him out of bed and drove away with another man, and also had been drinking. An interesting thing is he calls it his crown of thorns to bear, which, as I said earlier, there's sort of like maybe he sees himself as Jesus or his level of God.
Oh, right.
Because he says crown of thorns, and I mean, like, either you're just scrounging around for biblical things to say, Mr. Charles Laughton, or you're trying to tell us something here.
He is, yeah.
So he says he'll remain here to take care of the children. You know, he tried to save her, but the devil wins sometimes. Can't nobody say I didn't do my best to save her, but he didn't do his best to save her, and as we see is the most striking and eerie scene of this whole movie. Underwater with seaweeds, Willa's corpse in the Model T, submerged in the Ohio River, her long blonde hair flying, her throat slashed, and leaning on the everlasting arms played over it, just silently lingering. It's so good, man.
It is a lot of direct, as we heard previously. Guillermo del Toro. He said that he has been trying to.
It is Breaking Bad. Because it's Saul Goodman.
He has been trying to recreate that scene of the peaceful corpse in the water with the hair flowing like it did. He's been trying to recreate that for 20 years. He hadn't been able to do it.
Yeah, this is the creepiest moment of leaning on the everlasting arms we'll ever get, because it's just like it's that good. So Uncle Birdie is the only one to find their body in the water fishing while this goes on. So this then transitions to a shot of Harry Powell leaning on a tree outside the house. He unforgettably calls out for the children. Children.
Yeah.
And again, as we discussed earlier, the octave way is what Charles Laughton told him to do to make him very menacing, sort of.
Yes.
And this is very iconic.
And there's also, it ends with a shot that's a callback to the old silent movies. What was that?
Yes, we get a 1920s style iris showing that John and Pearl are hiding in the cellar, contemplating escape as he's searching menacingly for them.
It's D.W. Griffith style. That's where he got that from. So yeah.
Indeed. So Powell then opens the basement door and shouts down a warning from them from the top of the stairs to come out. He's like,
I can hear you whispering, children, so I know you're down there.
I can
feel myself getting awful mad. I'm coming to find you now.
But, fortunately, or unfortunately, Mrs. Spoon has arrived, and she innocently drags them out. So it's like, is it a good thing? Did she get saved? No, not really.
Because they could have made.
They got saved and dumped back in the hands of Harry Powell, just out of the frying pan and into the fire. So that night, we have a drunken Uncle Bertie. He's speaking to a framed picture of his deceased wife, Bess, as we talked about. And he's talking about what he witnessed at the bottom of the river. And the dialogue here is word for word from the book, and it's a very good description at that.
Down there in the deep place, with her hair waving soft and lazy like meadowgrass under floodwater, and that slit in her throat like she had an extra mouth. Sweet heaven, save poor old Uncle Birdie.
So next is the scene, John, Pearl, and Harry are all at dinner, and Pearl is asking if she can eat, if she can drink the milk, if she can eat the turkey, if she can eat any item on the thing, which Harry's like, of course he can, of course he can, of course he can. He also uses this moment to show off the blade he uses on meddlers, he says. So he's like, you see this knife? I use it on meddlers. John is a meddler.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Another thing, Pearl tries to touch it, but he says, oh no, little lamb, don't touch it. That makes me mad. That makes me very mad. And so he's just going like, where's the money at?
But that's why I
And she's
promised
all
John
like, oh, but
too.
John said, and he's like, John
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And he loses his temper, and Pearl cries at the result of it. But even upsetting her doesn't stop him, so he goes, now where's the money at? Again. And then finally, this is when John lies to him, and he says, oh, it's under a stone in the cellar. I'll confess for her. And they lead him down by candlelight. Unfortunately, his ear groping at the floor reveals it's just concrete. So Pearl then is like, oh, John made a sin. John told a lie. So then Powell is like, oh.
The Lord's a-talking to me now. He's a-saying, a liar is an abomination before mine eyes. Speak or I'll cut your throat and leave you to drip like a hog hung up in butchering time.
So he's about to cut his throat before finally Pearl just gives up and says, it's in my doll, it's in my doll.
Oh, poor girl. She did that to save her brother, okay?
Then Powell looks upward, he sits back, he laughs out loud and says, oh, the doll. Why, sure, the last place anyone would think. And so he's just laughing it out. But John takes the opportunity to juke him, snuff out the candle, and knock loose a shelf board that crushes Powell's head with preserve jars. Then begins the chase. Powell is raging after them messily like a monster.
Like an animal.
That they wasn't already a monstrous animal at this point.
Yeah, well, there's another part later that I'll bring up about animals, but go ahead.
Oh, by the way, at this point, there was a point earlier in the movie where John and Uncle Bertie were fishing together, and he goes,
You were in trouble. Holler and come a running. Uncle Bertie's your friend.
But this time, they temporarily lose him by locking him in the cellar, and they go to Uncle Bertie, plead for him to help, but he's drunk at this point. He's too drunk to do anything. So he doesn't help them at all. The only person they had that actually said he would help didn't help.
Yeah.
So Pearl then tries to sleep on Uncle Bertie's bed before John is like, no, don't do that. And he picks her up, and they escape on a canoe. But Powell appears behind him, just ravaging through the trees like an animal, crashing down on the riverbank through the underbrush as they escape.
It reminds now the way he's moving. I have to say, I'm not the only one who said this, but it reminded them of Frankenstein. His arms are stretched out.
He does do that, so he almost reaches for the canoe, but he doesn't touch it because he slips waist deep in a mud hole as it slides by just out of reach. We get an animalistic, blood-curdling, inhuman eruption from his bowels that just, it's so striking. It's just a monstrous cry.
I think he's dropping the mask of the demon.
Yeah, he did this. Robert Mitchum, man, how did you do that, man? That's so good.
He's got this mask of the preacher, I'd like to tell you the story about Cain and Abel. This mask, and now that mask drops, and he's just this monster. He's like, ah! Yeah.
So after this, we get a montage of peaceful cruising under the mystical starry heavens as they're going along the river. At this point, Pearl sings a hauntingly beautiful song undercut by very conflicted sort of music.
But one night these two pretty children flew away into the sky.
Yeah, at this point she's talking about them flying away to the moon, and just the notes are so pure that it's just so beautiful, but at the same time the violins are just like and they're just it's very conflicting.
Yeah.
So then they finally arrive at a barn to sleep on the loft. At this point we also get undercut with another song that calls back to the first song, which is Rest, Little One, Rest. You also notice a bird in the cage as well at this point.
Birds will sing in yonder willow.
So John, Pearl go to sleep in the loft of the barn, and they leave once John wakes up to Harry Powell on horseback singing, and he's never sleeping, and he's just riding on horseback.
Does that man never sleep?
Yeah, this is the famous scene.
Don't he never sleep?
So they travel off in a boat some more, arriving ashore with Mrs. Rachel Cooper, who's from the beginning of the movie. She is the mother goose of all of them. She's whipping them away to her home where they see the other three girls that she adopted.
That sounds bad, but she's like...
We talked about punishment in a good sense.
Yeah, it's not bad. She's kind of like, come on.
She's like, come on, get an actual life and get bathed and come with me and walk all in a straight line with baskets, as we see in this next scene. Sort of like Mother Goose, as we see, because you see those pictures of the duck and the ducklings walking all in a straight line.
Yeah, also, I would also say...
It's endearing.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. I love her character. Do you remember the nursery rhyme where it said, there was an old woman who lived in a shoe, she had so many children she didn't know what to do? Well, this lady has no problem with all these kids. They belong with her. She's so good with them.
She is. So they go to the grocery store in this town, which is the second location. It's literally just, the rustic town and the slightly bigger town that they go to, and that's literally it, and the Ohio River. So she's talking with the grocer, mentioning that she is a strong tree with branches for many birds. I'm good for something in this world, and I know it too. Unfortunately, they notice that the eldest girl is gone, and they find out she was trying to buy a magazine and looking interested at some two boys.
She's getting into teenage years, and a lot of girls they want attention. This is interesting.
She especially wants someone to notice her prettiness.
Yeah, and that gets used. to be honest.
So when John gets her next at the night, Mrs. Cooper is telling him the Bible story of the Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses on a raft, which the children blatantly compare to John and Pearl, because it's like, oh, it's something going in on a floating thing to a mother, which is very funny. So through this scene, John is slowly warming up to her and gets her an apple, which comes back later. As we'll see, a lot of things come back later.
In this case, an apple is like, I think it's, I care about you, or I'm nurturing you. It's not, the apple of temptation. It's an apple of nurturing.
Yeah, but next scene, Ruby is out again. There's jazz and neon signs blinking. And she's nearly approached by one of the boys before Harry Powell comes in, buys her ice cream in the magazine, and learns from her John and Pearl's location while she tries to show off her prettiness. Hook, line, and sinker, man.
Yeah, he sunk her all right.
And then once he learned that John and Pearl exist, he immediately leaves, which is just so him.
He just turned the corner.
I have nothing to do here.
Yeah, he went.
He's literally like, I have nothing to do here.
He's like, done. And he just turns left and walks away.
And he was just watching her eating the ice cream, like, just so bored. He's like, I want to know this only. I don't care about anything but the money. Very selfish. At this point, Ruby guiltily says herself,
I've been bad.
And later at night confesses to Rachel Cooper of her escapades and of telling the preacher about John.
I've been out with men. Child, you were looking for love, Ruby, in the only foolish way you knew how. We all need love, Ruby. I lost the love of my son. I found it with you all. You're going to grow up to be a strong, fine woman, and I'm going to see to it that you do.
So next day, Harry Powell, knowing where they are, has come up right to their front gate, claiming they're his children, using his same tactics as usual. He says, oh, them poor little lambs. I never hope to see them again in the world. No, dear madam, if you know, with a crown of thorns I bore in the search for them stray chicks.
He uses that crown of thorns nonsense again.
Is he saying he's been as whipped and tortured as the Lord Jesus Christ? Man.
He is saying that a little bit, but he's also just using the building blocks of the Bible verses and the Bible stories.
So he's like, oh, I know what the Bible is. For God so loved the world that he gave his God and only Son, for whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. There, I know the Bible. Or in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I know the Bible, but he doesn't really.
It's like, you know how you have those old houses on those movie sets where if you push any further down, the whole set falls down? It's just a facade is what you call that. It's this thin, like it's all a mask. It's all fake. So if he can just tell you a couple of things about, love and hate and Cain and Abel, crown of thorns, caring for these little stray chicks, anything he can throw out there to make you bite the worm on the end of the hook, he's going to do it. He tries it with Miss Rachel.
He even attempts to tell the story of right hand and left hand before getting interrupted.
Yeah, she's like, nope. She's like, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, she doesn't want to hear it at all.
I love it.
So the children appear then. Pearl just opens her arms and embrace while John is like cold in recognition. And she's like, oh, what's wrong? Why aren't you going to your father?
John, when your dad says come, you should mind him.
He ain't my dad.
And when you think she'd buy into his schemes, into Harry Powell's schemes, she sees right through him and says,
no, and he ain't no preacher neither.
I love it.
So at this point, Harry Powell just jumps straight for the doll, but John grabs it first and dives on their front porch. And so he brandishes his deadly switchblade, crawls in after him, but something is tapping him on the back. He looks up. It's Rachel's shotgun. She's got a freaking gun. She's just like, you know what, you're out. I'm gonna hunt you like prey.
That's her sword,
A fox preying on her chickens.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my goodness, that's actually really good.
Yeah, and also there's a line at some point later where she says, "I got something trapped in my barn," almost like she's saying he's like an animal. I've got this animal. He's not even worth saying, there's this guy in my barn. Need you to look at. He's just like, I got something trapped in my barn. He's not.
Exactly.
He's not human. He's not worth.
We talk about that shortly later.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
She just orders him off the property, and he retreats to his horse and rides off, shaking his fist.
But you haven't heard the last of Harry Powell yet. The Lord God Jehovah will guide my hand in vengeance. I'll be back when it's dark.
Then comes the famous scene of them sitting, Powell outside and Cooper in, up all night singing a Leaning in the Everlasting Arms duet while she's brandishing her gun. Another famous scene. Lots of famous moments in the scene.
Yeah, and they're harmonizing. It's funny. It's kind of like you're singing it, well, I'm singing it too, and I'm singing the other part.
And this is the last time we hear this Leaning on the Everlasting Arms again, so it's sort of like a defeat, I guess, of them?
Yeah, in a way.
A rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. See, he's singing it, and it's him trying to intimidate, and she's singing it, and she's trying to intimidate. But the thing is, though, she's singing it from a place of purity, and he's singing it from a place of greed and evil.
Exactly. After this, it turns out he has disappeared whenever Ruby comes in with the candle, and she's like, oh, turn that candle out, I can't see him anymore. Turns it out, he's gone. So he's like, you would just get the children together.
He's like a slasher villain. You know, if you turn your head, they just disappear.
So the group is just in the kitchen, and there's a little short scene of an owl pouncing on a rabbit, and Rachel comments, it's a hard world for little things. Exactly.
Yep. Imagery.
Then she paces back and forth in front of the children, telling about Herod's massacre of the babies to kill the Messiah, which is interesting. It's saying that he's gonna kill John and Pearl, essentially.
Yeah, it's a parallel with...
It is in parallel with Moses as well, because it's like, oh, it's a Moses, if you didn't know, had the Pharaoh killing every child under like 3 or something, and he escaped on a canoe. And then here we get another instance of a killing in order for search, which is interesting because that's parallels.
Yeah, and she's using Bible stories, but she's doing it from a holy place, whereas Harry Powell, everything he does is to just gain what he wants. He's playing a game.
So then arrives Harry Powell as usual. He's like, figured I was gone, huh? So she sends the children to safety upstairs, cocks the gun, aims and asks, what do you want? Powell's voice is heard in the darkness. I want them kids. That's the only thing. He's just like, no pretend anymore. So she's like, you know, I'll shoot after counting to 3. And after she does so, here's a line from the movie, accurately recreated in the movie, from the book. He rocketed suddenly upwards before her very eyes, his twisted mask caught for 1 split second in the silver moonlight like a vision in a photograph negative. Or rather a film negative, because I guess, you know, it's a
right.
film.
Yeah, it is.
So she blasts him with the shotgun, after which he runs out of the house, whelping like a wounded animal, grabbing his behind. He's become a silly cartoon, animalistic being in comparison to the ultimate girl boss that is Rachel Cooper.
I love the way you put that. Yeah, it's interesting. He was so scary.
He was so scary. He still is, but since the scene with chase of John Pearl into the boat, he became more animalistic, and at this point, he's just a cartoon.
But he's unpredictable, too. And you may think, well, he's not as scary now. The thing is, if you really think about it, all the things that make him scary is how you see him.
And at this point, he gets trapped in the barn, and then Mrs. Cooper is like, she calls the police, is like, I got something trapped in my barn. Nothing really passed there.
Not a man. Something. Yeah, he's an object. He's an animal now. He's not even worth...
He's no danger. So at this point, the police arrest him. Unfortunately, it gives John PTSD back to the moment where his father got arrested. So then he goes, don't. And he just takes Pearl's doll with the money in it, slaps it on Powell's prone body, and is like, here, take it. Just take it, man. So the money is now with the police. Next is the trial scene, where John does not outright confirm that Harry Powell was the guilty one, but he's confirmed guilty anyway.
I think he's still afraid of him in a way, because he's like, I can't look him in the eye, because it's just, he wants to move on. I think he wants to move on away from ever looking at him again.
So the group all walk away in line fashion, away from this roaring crowd of people with pitchforks. They're just... Mrs. Spoon, along with all the rest of the village people, are just rioting.
Mrs. Spoon, okay. She is like, I love this guy. He's so great. Now she's like, string him up. Hang him high.
Exactly. So... Ruby, unfortunately, is still tied to him. She's like, oh, I still love him. Can we surely, go meet up again? But nope. No, you can't. So Mrs. Rachel Cooper just grabs her out. Next scene is the last scene. It is Christmas. It's a very endearing scene showing the girls. They give Mrs. Rachel Cooper paws some potholders for Christmas, while John, he gives the apple that was on a dresser and the inside of the doily that was under the bowl with the apples from the dresser top. It's the richest gift a body could have, she says. But Ruby gets the actual brooch, which is very endearing. John gets that watch he always wanted. We talked about earlier about how much he wanted that watch from the store earlier. And then we get the final line of the movie, which we have
Lord save little children. You'd think the world would be ashamed to name such a day as Christmas for one of them and then go on in the same old way. My soul is humble when I see the way little ones accept their lot. Lord, save little children. The wind blows and the rains are cold. Yet they abide. They abide and they endure.
Indeed, the wind blows and the rains are cold, yet they abide. And that's where the movie ends. So, Father, what did you think?
This movie is an underrated, I think, movie. At the time, it wasn't given, I think it's just due. I don't think people were ready for it. I've heard some historians say that all the movies of the 50s, there's this conformity to them. There's this, sameness. I mean, were there great musicals and things like that during this time? Yeah. Were there some great, B-movie, sci-fi schlock? Yeah. Westerns or whatever. There's kind of, everybody's trying to just, do the regular picture that you can package up and get into theaters.
But this is the one representation of Charles Laughton's mind, heart, and soul and body that he put into this movie, and it's the only thing we have from him.
Yeah, but just like Orson Welles, his first go out is excellent and wasn't really fully appreciated until later on in his career.
Although Citizen Kane does have a lot more complexity, and so it's like, it's not as great considered, but it's all very great movies of all time.
Sometimes the simplest story can have a lot to it.
And that Charles Schumann score is honestly my favorite dreamy music, except for, of course, this dreamy music. Right.
I think this is definitely worth a watch for anybody who likes just excellent
These are
film.
masterpieces.
The story is very straightforward and simple, but a lot of stories are very straightforward and simple. It's not necessarily the complexity of the story that you're trying to tell, it's how you tell it.
And the way he told this is a very unique way of telling this. Like, no one would have told really like this, murderer story about, commenting on the corruption of religion in a way that makes it like a fantastical Lord of the Rings-esque journey down a boat sort of idea. No one would think of doing that.
Kind of a fairy tale, with a nursery Mother Goose kind of imagery, along with darker elements, and it just it marries itself really well to that. And honestly, I think it deserves more praise than it's gotten, but I think a lot of directors nowadays that a lot of us film reviewers and film fanatics really respect, they really do like this movie, and I happen to be one of them.
And this happens to be the last movie in our Cinematic Classics month, and also should be the last one for 2023, which is exciting. 2022. In 2023, that'll be exciting when we get to Season 2. And after the second season, in between every season, we'll have some bonus episodes, 4 of them, for you to consume at the same time, in the same way as we've been doing them now.
All right, so just on a personal note, William, what did you think about doing these bonus episodes? What's the big takeaway for you?
I feel like they've been pretty fun, talking about, things we wouldn't normally talk about. For instance, we're talking about really great movies is the subject of this one, and we wouldn't have been able to talk about some of these gems without breaking the mold and, going all the way to the 50s when we're still in the 30s by this time. So, and covering Citizen Kane, the best movie of all time, is honestly something you can't repeat.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is that our format for the podcast has been science fiction, fantasy, maybe a little bit of early horror, but some some adventure films now and again. And this does kind of go. It's like we're taking a little trip, on the off ramp to just a little small little town, just to look around for a little bit, and then we're going to get back on the interstate moving forward. But we'll always have those memories of that little town that we just drove through, just because we wanted to, like a little sightseeing trip. But I think that just makes it that more richer, because as we go forward, you'll always remember these gems of movies that if we didn't do this bonus episode deal, maybe you wouldn't have seen them. So, hey, maybe that's a good thing.
That is, and there's especially a ton of movies we've covered, like The Vampire Bat. People will go like, what's The Vampire Bat? And we'll be like, watch our episode, and then watch the movie. And you'll be like, oh, I didn't know this existed. And, what's another movie that people don't really know existed? Der Golem.
Murders on the Rue Morgue.
Yeah, and Murders in the Rue Morgue. No one knew that there was an adaptation from that early. So that sort of makes sense. And we're glad we get to introduce new old movies to people.
It's new to you. You
to
have
the Gen Z age.
Yeah, and have new eyeballs. You have new eyeballs that are watching this with. And honestly, these movies are not as fast-paced as a lot of modern movies. They take their time to get their points across. And a lot of people, you have to take your time with it and really kind of taste it.
So, join us for season 2 in like a little bit or so. We'll get that out. But Happy New Year as well. We'll just say that since it's like, New Year's and stuff. So take care.
Yeah, Happy New Year. And we'll see you in the new year 2023. We will let you know via Twitter. We'll let you know through the blog. We'll let you know however, all the different ways we can.
And if you don't know how to access it, we're going to play it right now.
Don't forget to open your third eye and telepathically message us at cinefanpod@gmail.com. Set your chronoscope dial to the future setting and peruse cinematicfanpodcast.wordpress.com. Hunker over your ham radio as your keen ears listen for the ghostly voices tweeting on our Twitter @CinematicFanta1. Exchange all of your money into Republic credits and donate at our Patreon page at patreon.com/cinefanpodcast. Ending transmission now.